He has the weakest class, but becomes the most powerful fighter. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. In this world, when the mana in the air reaches a critical level, a deep chasm called the Abyss manifests, opening a portal to the void, the world of demons. The deeper you venture, the more powerful the beasts you encounter become. One night in the protagonist's city, an abyss with a depth of 12 appeared severe enough for beasts known as lords to show up. At that moment, an experienced warrior prepared his old axe for battle after thinking he would never need to wield it again. He then instructed his grandson Noel to hide in an underground shelter while he would buy time until help from the capital arrived. Noel protested, pointing out that there was no way of knowing when reinforcements would come, meaning his grandfather would fight alone and put his life at risk. To calm the young man, the veteran reminded him that he was over death, the indomitable demon, and that he would protect his grandson, even if it cost him his life. With those words, the warrior set out for battle. In the city, the beasts wreaked havoc, devouring the population and setting fire to every home until Overdeath arrived and faced the creatures head-on. Their leader, a Lord-class beast, ordered the human to be killed, but the old man exuded confidence, proving he wouldn't be an easy target. Meanwhile, Noel cried in his corner alongside the household staff. Suddenly, an explosion caught everyone's attention. Hours later, when the battle had ended, Noel emerged from the shelter in search of his grandfather. The city was in ruins, bodies strewn everywhere, and among them lay Overdeath, gravely wounded. As Noel approached him, he heard his grandfather say that age catches up with everyone, even him, and that this was the end of a seeker. For when you make battle your purpose, you always walk beside death. The old man then asked if, knowing this, Noel still wished to become a seeker. With tears in his eyes, the boy reaffirmed his desire. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, Overdeath asked his grandson to become a seeker who would never be defeated. Noel promised to reach that level, and his grandfather declared that he had always loved him before drawing his last breath. As the young man wept before the tragedy, an older Noel recounted that his grandfather's name was Brandon Stolen, a man capable of defeating a beast from abyssal depth 13, the Silver Cossidus, and who became the most renowned seeker, known as Overdeath, the Indomitable, the greatest of all seekers. 2 years later, Noel followed in Brandon's footsteps, as promised, joining his group to fight monsters threatening them in a cave. Noel ordered Lloyd and Walter to intercept the enemies, while Tanya provided support from the rear. Thanks to the mage's blinding spells, the warriors found openings to defeat their opponents on the front line, while Noel himself stood back with his arms crossed at a safe distance. After all, he belonged to the weakest support class, known as the Eloquent. He and his group were battling lesser vampires, a subspecies incapable of using magical abilities. The queen of these beings could reproduce more of them endlessly. For this reason, Noel warned the group to stay alert. Even though these vampires were offspring of the main body, they could still tear a bull apart with their bare hands. One of these creatures, despite having its torso nearly split in half, attacked Noel while he was distracted, but Tanya quickly eliminated it, pointing out that they needed to aim for the head, otherwise the vampires would regenerate as many times as needed. With that, the group continued their journey. Walter questioned why they didn't go straight for the queen instead of wasting time with the minions, since killing the source would prevent the vampires from reproducing. However, Noel explained that they couldn't do that because the mission was too tough for a C-rank team like theirs, but by defeating the others first, their chances of success against the queen would increase. Though he wasn't fully convinced, Walter accepted Noel's final decision because, as a member of the Blue Beyond, he believed that the team should function based on hierarchy. According to him, the only reason they were on a B-rank mission despite being C-rank was thanks to Noel's skills and charisma. Noel reflected that the Eloquent class was a specialized support class capable of summoning words with enhancement effects, boosting the group's abilities. However, their combat strength was the weakest there was. Relying on others for survival, the Eloquents were considered the most fragile class of all. After this reflection, to everyone's surprise, the vampire queen suddenly appeared, releasing a cloud of poisonous gas. Lloyd asked Tanya to provide support while he searched for Noel, but the vampire attacked the girl, knocking her down. Enraged, Walter swung his axe at the enemy but missed. In the midst of the smoke, Noel coughed uncontrollably, growing weaker by the second. Meanwhile, his companions couldn't stand up to the enemy, without the eloquence buffs. Walter shouted, asking if this was how Noel planned to become an eloquent. These words of challenge took the boy's mind back to memories of his childhood, when his grandfather died before his eyes. With this image in his head, Noel refused to let anyone underestimate him. That feeling sparked a strange glow in his eyes, prompting him to act swiftly, pulling out a pistol and charging toward the vampire queen. Without delay, he invoked his eloquence technique and initiated a strategy called tactician. With this buff, by giving orders to the group, Noel increased each member's abilities by 25%. He immediately alerted the two front-line fighters to dodge an area attack that was about to hit. As predicted, everything unfolded as Noel had said, and Walter and Lloyd avoided the strike. Then the support used battle voice, raising the team's resistance and mana by 25%. He ordered Tanya to deploy shields for the two warriors while they attacked. The tactic worked and the monster suffered severe damage. But Tanya noticed more vampires gathering around, fearing they would assist the queen. Faced with this situation, Noel cast the Mental Clarity Peer Support spell to stabilize the mage's mind and restore her will to fight. After that, Noel set a 74-second countdown on his watch and declared that he would handle the weaker foes while the others should focus on the main body. Tanya needs to keep providing shields for the allies, while Lloyd and Walter must dodge the queen's attacks as their best strikes are prepared. With the wolf's howl, the eloquent stuns several vampires and readies his magic weapon Silver Flame to freeze other enemies with the ice bullet. One of the vampires managed to escape, and Noel only has one bullet left, not to mention the 43 seconds left on the countdown he had set on his watch. By his calculations, the vampire's claws will pierce him at the 28-second mark, so he casts the chain plan assault command and orders Walter and Lloyd to activate their attack skills against the queen. Lloyd prepares his aura blade and Walter uses deadly drive. At that moment, the queen's head is struck, but as they celebrate, Tanya and the others see Noel narrowly avoiding being impaled by the vampire that attacked him. Internally, the eloquent muses that when the main body dies, its kind stop moving too. As the countdown reaches 0, the enemy leader's death is confirmed and the lesser vampire loses its mobility. So Noel is still intact and Blue Beyond's mission is complete. The group members berate the support for the recklessness of his strategy, but the boy cracks a smile, remembering when he used to cry to his grandfather for being in the weakest class of all. One day Brandon had said the boy was just like his mother, but unlike her, he had a talent for being a seeker just like his grandfather. Even though he was an eloquent, Brandon promised to train his grandson until he became the greatest seeker of all. Finally, Brandon asked for the boy's trust. On the way out of the dungeon, Noel looks up at the sky and says he trusts his grandfather and that he will become the greatest, even surpassing Overdeath despite being in the weakest class. Later, the group arrives in Atri, the imperial capital of the Velnant Empire, a city that thrived thanks to magic engineering, though Velnant's lands are more vulnerable to the abyss than others. But it was the scientific collection and use of beasts' items that provided the material necessary for the empire to become what it is today, making this the kingdom's main trade activity. Here, seekers are admired by the entire population for their fight against the abyss creatures. Noel became a seeker at 15 and moved to Atri in search of companions because an eloquent cannot fight alone. Among them are Walter the warrior, Tanya the healer, and Lloyd swordsman and team leader. Reflecting on this in a tavern after the mission, Noel thinks it would be even better to have an observer in the group, but decides to focus on gaining experience with his current team. Walter interrupts the boy's introspection, assuming he's upset about the payment received for the items dropped in the mission. He tells him not to worry too much about that because a seeker shouldn't be so concerned with money, and his grandfather probably would have said the same. Speaking of which, the eloquent recalls that Brandon said quite the opposite, that a seeker should always have the best equipment possible to face challenges. According to the seasoned warrior, notoriety is an honor for seekers, and the boy should never be ashamed if others look down on his well-crafted armor. Moreover, Noel should never let anyone underestimate him. Remembering this, the boy arrogantly ends the argument with Walter, which irritates the warrior who claims the eloquent is going to tear the group apart with his attitude. Noel doesn't back down and keeps provoking the big guy, drawing everyone's attention in the tavern. He says Walter thinks too highly of himself just because he's 2 years older, while Walter retorts that the kid only hides behind the team and gives orders. Noel mocks the fact that his companion acts like a battle god, prompting the big guy to grab the eloquent by the collar, promising to kill him. Noel challenges him to a fight, but Lloyd steps in to break it up. After the commotion, the Blue Beyond team gathers in a square and laments the small amount of money left after expeditions due to high expenses. Lloyd tries to console everyone, saying a great opportunity will come, but Noel points out that well-paid missions are rare, and unlike clans that receive government jobs, Blue Beyond is a third-party group, so they have to pay a high commission to the contractor. For this reason, Noel suggests they use all their money to form their own clan. Lloyd reminds them they only have 13 million fills, while the government charges 20 million for that, so the eloquent offers to cover the rest because it's crucial for them to form a clan. After all, the Empire encourages the growth of Seekers as they are the people's heroes, and since Blue Beyond has youth, beauty, and charisma among its members, they'll surely attract sponsors. With that said, Walter agrees they need to speed up the process because he wants fame, money, and women as soon as possible. Tanya opposes the idea, thinking the team isn't experienced enough for such a big step, so Lloyd is left with the final vote, but Noel warns that if they decide not to start the clan, he'll leave the group. As he said when they first formed, he has a big dream of becoming greater than Overdeath and can't give up on this plan. With those words, Lloyd agrees to form a clan and schedules a meeting 2 days later at his house to discuss the details. With that settled, everyone parts ways except for Tanya and Lloyd, who remain together in the square. However, later on, Noel and Walter discover they've been betrayed by the rest of the team. Both the leader and the healer are leaving the city quietly. Later, Noel discovers through a letter that Lloyd made terrible investments and got into debt, which is why he took all the group's money to pay what he owed and fled the city before everything came to light. After reading this, the eloquent bursts into laughter without any restraint, leaving Walter furious at his partner's carefree behavior. Noel explains that he couldn't help but laugh upon learning about the humiliating downfall of the great Lloyd. Then he asks Walter where he got the letter. The big guy explains that he found it in the former leader's lodgings, because he heard about a good job at the tavern earlier that morning and went to notify the two runaways before anyone else could. But when he arrived, the room was empty, and the lodging owner handed him the letter. According to the owner, Lloyd left the previous night around 8 p.m. Knowing this, Noel concludes that they fled just before Atri's gates closed for the night. Considering it's now 9:30, it's been 12 hours since their escape. Noel's plan is to check the records of the two's departure and find out which gate they used. Most likely Lloyd and Tanya didn't rent a horse to avoid leaving tracks, so Noel and Walter could catch up to them if they did. Regardless, all the big guy wants is to give their ex-boss a beating. It'd be one of those soul-satisfying beatdowns. Once the man finishes speaking, Noel gets real, explaining that this is a definitive betrayal, meaning that if they find the fugitives, they'll fight back, and it'll probably be a fight to the death. Both Lloyd and Tanya are formidable opponents, so it wouldn't be smart to think this is an easy win, especially because there's emotional attachment between the four members. To make matters worse, even if they win this dispute, Noel and Walter won't be able to recover the money, which is exactly why the other two fled, pretending it was a romantic escape. With that said, Noel assures that he'll pay them back 100-fold for what they've done. Afterward, the duo heads to the Orcs Club. As soon as they enter the establishment, Noel announces to all the Seekers that their former companions from the Blue Beyond, Lloyd and Tanya, have fled the city with the group's money. Anyone who captures them alive will receive a reward of 2 million fill. Walter questions why the eloquent is doing this, and Noel explains that it's much easier to have a bunch of people roaming the area looking for the runaways. Soon, a member of the Lightning Bite group volunteers to go after the fugitives, asks the boy, offering the reward for the details, and sets off with the rest of his team. Following their lead, other tavern goers also express interest in the job. After several leave to begin the search, a man shows up saying he knows where Lloyd and Tanya went, but doesn't want to give the information for free. Imagining that this older man's group probably isn't capable of going toe-to-toe with his former colleagues, Noel offers him 1 million, but the informant asks for 1.5 million. The protagonist sticks to his initial offer while analyzing that this man is an old seeker who can no longer find work and is in desperate poverty. Indeed, the seeker gives up on raising the price and tells them he saw the pair of fugitives passing by Varley's road exiting through the south gate. Their likely destination is Carnot Village. With this information, Noel asks the informant to gather his group and meet him at the south gate. Walter will accompany the informant while Noel himself needs to take care of something before the meeting. Once everything is taken care of, the Eloquent reunites with his partner and the others. Walter asks if Noel is sure he can face Lloyd and Tania, and the boy assures him he'd kill them both without a hint of mercy. After all, he always knew what he'd do if he were betrayed by friends on his journey. One of the men from the other group asks if the Eloquent never trusted his friends, and he responds that trusting isn't the same as having blind faith. Then he tells Walter he can wait in the city, prompting the big guy to grumble that he's being called weak. Thinking to himself, Noel considers that in reality the big guy has a soft heart, and if he's not fully committed to the upcoming fight, it will undoubtedly be a painful experience for him. Later in the afternoon, Lloyd suggests they rest for the night and continue walking in the morning. Seeing that Tania is very worried, he asks her to relax because once Noel realizes he can't get the money back, he won't care. Just as Lloyd finishes that sentence, Noel himself appears behind them with his companions, using a stun howl to subdue the pursued. Walter nearly loses it and almost punches Lloyd in the face, but Noel tells his partner to calm down, stating he understands the former leader's motive from the letter, but he wants to know what he did with the lesser vampire's bounty. Lloyd confesses that he used it to pay off another debt, leading the protagonist to deduce that the investments mentioned in the letter were a lie, and that Lloyd squandered all the money to pay off gambling debts. Upon hearing this, Walter becomes even more furious, knowing the guy spent all the money they risked their lives to get. At that moment, Lloyd yells that the two have no idea what it's like to be a leader. He didn't want to spend that money, but when he realized he was already drowning in debt. Moreover, he believes his former companions have no right to criticize him since they left Lloyd to bear the burden of leadership, but now they want the privileges when it's convenient for them. However, as the man speaks, Noel kicks him in the face and reminds him that Lloyd wanted to be the leader. Now, after losing all the group's money to gambling, he still wants to play the victim. As he rants, the Eloquent delivers several more kicks to his former companion, who begins begging Noel to stop. At this point, Walter looks away, not wanting to see the scene, and shifts uncomfortably. The other group present is left in awe of the boy's determination to punish the ex-leader, while Tania also pleads for the violence to stop. Noel asks if the woman wants to take the kicks for her friend, and promises he won't hold back just because she's a woman. The protagonist then uses Confess, an ability that forces the girl to tell the truth. She admits that she also bet with Lloyd and spent the group's money, but blames him, arguing that she could have made a fortune if he hadn't stopped her from gambling. Upon hearing the truth, Noel lifts the spell, and Tania complains that it's illegal to use mind control spells for personal gain. However, Noel counters, explaining that it's allowed when the goal is to make a criminal confess a crime which had just happened. As a result, Tania and Lloyd are either headed for prison or will face 10 years of forced labor, which is typically the punishment for their kind of crime. Seeing the situation under control, the informant approaches Noel, asking for his reward. When the boy hesitates, the old man grabs his wrist, warning him not to be deceived. At that moment, the Eloquent knocks the man to the ground, calling him a failed seeker with ridiculous equipment. When the old man responds by drawing his sword, Noel lands a punch to his stomach, almost killing him. This move reminds Noel of his childhood, when his father delivered a similar blow, and explained that it causes a cardiac concussion in the opponent, rendering even the most powerful fighter unconscious. Unlike other classes, Eloquents can't cast self-enhancing spells, which is why mastering such techniques is crucial. At that moment, an incredibly luxurious carriage appears on the road, and from it steps an eccentric noble named Finocchio Barzini, a well-known slaver in the region. He asks Noel if he took long, while the Eloquent reflects that this man is a subordinate of the most powerful mafia family in the imperial capital, the Lucianos. Finocchio is both refined and vulgar, cheerful and cruel, a true two-faced character. That's why people call him the Mad Clown. Walter asks if this is what Noel had been planning. Noel replies that Lloyd and Tania probably had no money, so he struck a deal with Finocchio to recover the lost funds by selling the two as slaves to the mafia. Otherwise, they would be handed over to the military police and forced into 10 years of slave labor of which only 2% of criminals survive. With that, Finocchio assesses his potential purchase at 6 million fil. Noel protests that the amount is far too low. The slaver explains that the timing is terrible as the Church of the Holy Cross is about to issue a decree of poverty, meaning the wealthy will have to cut back on luxuries, as spending too much on something like this would draw the church's ire. Noel questions if even the capital's most powerful mafia can't go against the church, and Finocchio confirms this. Still, the eloquent stands his ground, raising the price of the pair to 11 million. Finocchio is thrown off by the audacity and the price climbs to 12. As the mad clown continues his tantrum, the value shoots up to 15 million fil. Finocchio asks if the boy wants to become pig feed, to which Noel promises to tell everyone that the slaver bought the pair for 30 million, not 15. This would give the impression that the two were highly valuable, and considering they were both attractive young individuals, Finocchio Barzini could easily sell them later for up to 90 million. Recognizing Noel's cleverness, the mobster offers him a leadership position in his family, but Noel immediately refuses and asks, "So what will it be?" Finocchio accepts the deal but warns the boy never to pull such a stunt again. Then he orders the old man to keep his mouth shut about everything he just witnessed unless he wants his family to become pig feed. As Lloyd is being hauled away and the trader receives his payment, Tania begs for mercy, reminding Noel that they had always been companions. But Noel responds, "Companions don't gamble with other people's money, and a traitor will always be a traitor." Hearing this, Tania falls into despair, pleading with Walter for help, exploiting his feelings for her. When that doesn't work, she insults him, calling him useless. Before boarding his carriage, Finocchio comments on how frightening women can be, then bids Noel farewell. The eloquent pays the old seeker, who tries to insult him, saying Noel is only good for giving enhancements. Noel retorts that the old man's insults are as pathetic as he is, and that he should take lessons from Tania. As he turns to leave, the man calls him a devil. Noel reflects that seekers hunt beasts to survive, so being called a devil by a seeker is the highest form of resentment. In Noel's case, he intends to wear that title with pride, aiming to become the strongest in the world. The next day, back in Atri, Noel gives a bottle of liquor to Walter as a parting gift, as the warrior had decided the night before in a tavern that he would no longer be a seeker due to his emotional fragility. Though Noel had tried to persuade him to stay, the man had already made up his mind. The bottle symbolized their farewell. After Noel left, Walter wondered if the bastard even had a heart, especially since Tania had loved him. Yet he had never shown any interest. In the end, all Noel cared about was becoming stronger, which made him the group's only special member. With that, Walter took a sip from the bottle, calling Noel his best friend. Meanwhile, the eloquent contemplated his return to square one, deciding he must be like a snake, shedding its skin to grow stronger. With that in mind, he planned to rebuild the blue beyond. If you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to hit that like button. Your support helps motivate me to keep bringing you each episode. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update.